Astronomy in Reverse by Hansley. Chapter 10. A Year. When Bucky peels back the corner of newspaper covering the kitchen window to peek outside, he's pleasantly surprised to see that the snow that had fallen last night is already melted. Winter had been short, but this is the third time spring has falsely begun, bringing sunshine and warmth and light rain, only to be plunged back into snow the moment people start packing their winter gear away. Peter hadn't seemed to mind as inexplicably enthused about the snow as he is about pretty much everything else. Bucky hopes he'll never forget the day he came home from work, the sky already black even though it was only early evening, to find Peter grinning at him from the love seat surrounded by paper snowflakes and garlands he made himself hung on the walls and from the ceiling. Peter had been so proud of his decorating, exclaiming, "Surprise!" and then having to explain to Bucky exactly what the decorations represented. They'd stayed up all the way until the end of January. Bucky doesn't have any memories of Christmases or birthdays or any other kind of family event like that, but he knows the one he'd spent with Peter would be unrivaled in how much it means to him, even if he did. They'd curled up together on the love seat, drinking hot chocolate and watching holiday-themed movies, and in the morning they gave each other gifts. Sweaters, funnily enough, both knowing how cold the other had been since winter started and wanting them to be warm. Bucky had saved up and gotten Peter an extremely thick and practical hooded sweater that was double-lined with goose feathers to retain as much heat as possible. Peter had gotten Bucky a red and green and appropriately titled Ugly Christmas sweater that had Feliz Navidad printed on it. Bucky had barely taken it off all winter. In fact, the dad angle seemed to be a running theme among the gifts Peter had given him. A few weeks ago on his birthday, Peter had gifted him a large coffee mug that said, "World's Best Dad" on it, the only piece of kitchenware they have that isn't cracked and chipped, so Bucky still hasn't used it once, wanting to preserve it so it will last, displaying it proudly on the counter so he can see it and smile while he's making breakfast in the mornings, those quiet moments before Peter wakes. Those moments had been few and far between since they were attacked. Bucky had been anxious the morning after he told Peter about the Winter Soldier, worried how the kid would react to him afterward, if things would change between them, worried about the agent they left alive, about having to tell Peter that they definitely had to relocate now, dreading Peter being hurt by the news, dreading Peter telling him he'd rather they go their separate ways in light of learning what Bucky really is. But none of that had happened. Peter had brought him water and Tylenol for the splitting headache he somehow knew Bucky had, and sat next to him where Bucky laid on the mattress, his head pounding to the point that it felt like it was splitting him open. Peter had tended to him, worried but not afraid, not of him at least. It was more than Bucky ever dared to hope for.
"Peter,"
he had said after a while, voice splintered from the pain blooming deep in his skull.
"We screwed up. We can't stay here."
Peter had gone very still. "We didn't screw up."
"That guy saw your face,"
Bucky argued.
Hydra. They know who Spider-Man is now. They know you're a kid. They'll find you. We should have..."
He barely managed to stop himself in time.
"Left him."
"We couldn't just leave him?" Peter had said, eyes wide, as if he was shocked Bucky could say such a thing. "He would have died!"
"Peter,"
he said, tone gentle.
"that guy wasn't a good person."
"That doesn't matter!" Peter's face was equal parts remorseful and stubborn, as if he was pained by the thought of disagreeing with Bucky, of either of them being the cause of someone's death, but he had held firm all the same. "We couldn't just leave him," he'd said softly, shaking his head, voice quiet and assured. "It wouldn't have been the right thing to do." Bucky had sighed. Part of him wanted to laugh from how incredulous he felt that he could be so completely frustrated and endlessly fond of this kid all at once. He hadn't particularly wanted to kill the man either. He'd had his fill of death, of murder. But he also knew that Hydra wouldn't stop, and the cost of leaving that guy alive was uprooting their life here together completely.
"We can't stay here,"
Bucky had said again, his heart breaking at the sight of Peter's saddened lowered gaze.
"I can't let them find you again."
"But it's only the one guy who knows my face. He doesn't even know my name. And maybe it will be okay."
"Not if he tells the rest of Hydra that I'm connected to Spider-Man,"
he'd said.
They'll target you relentlessly every time you go on patrol. They're a huge organization, kid. Even I don't have any idea how many connections they have. We aren't safe here. You aren't."
Peter had been quiet for a long, tense moment. He ducked his head to hide his face from Bucky's gaze and then sighed, his chest rising and falling from the deep breath he took. When he looked up again, his eyes seemed defeated and determined at the same time.
"What if
He began hesitating before he steeled himself.
What if I didn't patrol anymore?"
Even now, Bucky's heart clenches painfully when he thinks of that morning, of the look on Peter's face and the tone of his voice when he had given up everything for the sake of preserving their life together, the broken home they both loved so much. The morning Peter had chosen Bucky over Spider-Man. Bucky had tried to argue, but he knew ultimately it was Peter's choice. If Peter would rather stay in Queens at his school in their apartment, what right did Bucky have to stop him from hanging up his figurative cape? He had never interfered in Peter's role as Spider-Man before, and he never wanted to. If Peter thought it was worth it, Bucky respected him enough to let him have his choice. But the months since then have been hard on them both, Peter especially. Bucky hadn't realized exactly how much being Spider-Man meant to the kid, what he got out of it besides helping people, what that freedom and responsibility and sense of control offered him after all the time he spent feeling completely helpless in his short life. Bucky hadn't realized at the time exactly what it was Peter had sacrificed for them, but slowly he began to see the toll it took. Peter had been restless. Every time a siren sounded anywhere nearby, he'd get this tense, tortured look on his face, like it took everything inside his small body to stay put on the ground. Bucky's heart ached for him in those moments as often as they were in their crowded city, but there was only so much he could do for Peter. He tried to distract him, to keep him busy, tire him out as much as possible. They spent even more time together than they had before. Bucky would escort him to and from school now, a little overprotective maybe, but he wouldn't take any chances of Hydra expanding their search to the school districts. They began to do more normal activities. Bucky would take Peter out, even when it unnerved him, to the ice skating rink and the dollar movies and the family bowling alley 4 blocks over, even when the costs added up. Peter could only sit still at home for so long before he'd be fidgeting with everything and driving Bucky crazy, so they started going out a lot more until winter really set in. That had been hard. The change of season meant less daylight, which meant more time spent indoors, as Bucky was hesitant to let Peter out after dark much anymore. Hydra wasn't above making a move in broad daylight, but they were much more likely to attack under the cover of night, out of the public eye. There had also been moments where Peter seemed down almost once winter started. Not overly, not even that noticeably. But Bucky had still picked up on the longing look Peter got in his eyes now and then, the sluggish way he seemed to move around before he left for school and after he got home.
"Some people get depressed around the holidays," Frank had told him when Bucky confided in him. "And he lost his mother, right? Maybe the season is bringing out old grief."
It made sense, but Bucky hated knowing there was nothing he could do for Peter, no way to ease his grief for his aunt and uncle and his parents. All he could do was be there, and when he sat Peter down and told him they could talk about it if he wanted to, well, the way Peter had leaned in to hug him and said, "I'm okay. You're here, so I'm okay," had gutted Bucky completely. But winter, it seems, is now finally over for good, and with a change of season, Peter also seems to be feeling better these days, more like his usual energetic self, smiling more than he had been in the weeks leading up to Christmas, chatting more animatedly as Bucky walks into school, Peter smiling and pointing at the different kinds of birds returning from the south. They have to stop more than usual to pet the random cats bathing in the morning sun, but thankfully the streets are still relatively empty. Bucky taking Peter to school much earlier than he used to so that he still has time to get to work. They fall into a comfortable silence as Peter's school comes into view, and when they stop a few yards from the building, Peter gives Bucky a quick hug goodbye and then steps back to head inside. He doesn't make it more than a step before Ned is running over to them, waving excitedly like he's trying to flag on a bus. "Peter! Peter, oh my God!" Peter stops, sending Bucky a confused, slightly worried look before he turns back to his friend. "Dude, what? You didn't hear, did you? About the Avengers?" Bucky stiffens slightly, his shoulders tensing, as Ned stops in front of them, gushing. Dude, everybody's freaking out. It's been all over the news. Oh, hi, Peter's dad. There was some kind of, attack or something in Lagos. The Scarlet Witch blew up a building full of Wakandan humanitarian workers. Holy crap! Peter says, eyes wide and face paling slightly. That's awful! Do they know what happened? Ned shrugs, seemingly not nearly as disturbed as Peter looks, and Bucky feels. Don't know, I guess he was trying to contain an explosion or something and accidentally aimed it at the building. How many people were hurt? Peter asks. His voice is quiet and weighed down, but Bucky can hear the thread of hope laced in it. The way Ned shakes his head unravels that thread, however. They haven't finished counting the, casualties. Peter noticeably slumps, and Bucky reaches out and lays his hand on the boy's shoulder, not wanting to embarrass the kid by pulling him into his arms in front of his friend and school. Peter looks up at him, then turns to Ned and says, I'll meet you inside, okay? To which Ned nods, bidding Bucky a quick goodbye as he turns and heads for the doors. Bucky doesn't have a chance to ask Peter if he's okay before the kid wraps his arms around his middle and hugs him, the tension easing out of his narrow shoulders as he does. Bucky returns the hug, gently patting the back of the boy's head as he says, You be safe, you hear me? And call me if you need to. Peter simply nods against his chest, tightening his arms around him. For the rest of the day while Bucky works, Frank routinely pops his head into the shop to update him on the Lagos bombing, the gruff older man clearly sharing Ned's love of spectacle, a fact that surprises Bucky somewhat. It's toward the end of the day as Bucky's getting ready to clean up and head out to go get Peter that Frank comes back in, shaking his head exasperatedly, and sternly informs him, Wakanda's all up in arms over this bombing thing. They're calling for a UN meeting to talk about putting the Avengers under international government control. It's horseshit if you ask me. Frank gestures animatedly with his hands, his exaggerated ranting usually at least somewhat entertaining to Bucky, but the situation now makes his stomach turn. That bloody terrorist would have killed way more people if they'd let him explode on the street. The hell was that girl supposed to do, huh? It was all nonsense, all this commotion because a kid made a mistake trying to save Captain America's life. A deafeningly loud creak echoes throughout the shop as Bucky's arm convulses and involuntarily closes his fist, snapping the handle of the metal wrench he's holding in half like a twig. Frank shoots him a startled, disbelieving look at the end of the handle that goes flying and hits the concrete floor with a suspicious amount of force. Crossbones, Frank says, his tone lacking its usual bite, too stunned. How the fuck did you do that? Sorry. Bucky mumbles numbly, his mind racing and his arm still resolutely clenched around the end of the wrench. Just grabbed it to tighten it up. That was cracked anyway, rusted shit. Apparently. Frank glances at the handle tip, his expression still aghast. Still, that's some mean grip you got there. Can't believe your boy's so scrawny considering all that muscle you're packing. Bucky only nods, not really listening, as he finally gets his fist open again. I need maintenance again, he thinks, remembering that it's almost been a year since that time Peter fixed him up. But then he realizes it's the tension in his own chest and shoulders that's making his arm act up, not the hardware. He forces himself to breathe deeply, feels the wires and gears and circuitry calm down slightly in his shoulder plate as the tension releases from his muscles. Shit! Frank comes up next to him, seems to deliberate over laying a hand on his shoulder, then thinks better of it. Sometimes I forget that you went overseas. Can't have it easy listening to me yammering on about bombings all day. Frank's tone is sympathetic, or as close to as Bucky's ever heard it, except for the time Peter got sick. Why don't you head on home? It's almost time to pick up your boy anyway. He nods again, his body suddenly feeling heavy, as though his clothes were made of lead. Frank's concern is misplaced, but he'll take the invitation to leave for Peter's school regardless. The sooner he can grab his kid and head home, the better. They say an abrupt goodbye before Bucky takes off, his chest feeling uncomfortably tight as he makes his way to the school. That was almost Steve! His head feels like there's a hurricane raging inside of it. Steve almost died at the hands of some terrorist in Lagos. They haven't seen each other since Bucky pulled him from the river since D.C. almost 2 years ago, but that apparently isn't enough time or distance for Bucky to get a handle on the anxiety that washes over him every time he thinks of Steve. Even the part of them that considers the man a threat, or trouble at the very least, seems to seize up at the mention of Steve almost getting killed, as though not even becoming enemies would be enough to undo the years of friendship that Bucky has tried very hard not to let himself remember. The part of him that still does see Steve as his friend had gone cold hearing what Frank had said. If the news is true and all those people died because one of his teammates was desperately trying to save Steve's life, well, the part of Bucky that would still gladly die for Steve Rogers knew instantly in that moment the kind of guilt Steve must be feeling right now, that level of grief. If anyone knows the insidiousness of survivor's guilt, it's Bucky. And Peter. He grits his teeth and continues walking head down, shoulders wide. He keeps moving to keep his blood flowing, sending oxygen throughout his body, and attempt to cool the raging anxiety still inside of him. What would he have done if that had been the news that broke this morning? Captain America dies in terrorist attack, or Lagos bombing claims life of Captain America. His stomach knots to the point of nausea. He has no intention of ever seeing Steve again, but the thought of not being able to makes him feel lightheaded and ill. The Lagos bombing is all anyone talks about for almost a week straight, until the King of Wakanda calls for a UN meeting in Vienna to sign the newly drafted Sokovia Accords. The world is up in arms over the news, the population seemingly divided in half, either in favor of or against the idea. It's not a huge shock, then, that the Avengers seem divided too, with only a few of them set to attend the meeting in Vienna, as Frank and Ned so graciously informed them. Bucky tries to keep his head down and focus on only the things that matter, his job and taking care of his child. Peter is much more concerned with the whole thing than Bucky is, being such an avid fanboy of the Avengers. He spends more time at Ned's house after school in that 1 week than he had all winter, poring over internet news sites together, trying to guess what will happen next. Bucky lets him, but always swings by Ned's place to pick him up so they can be home before the sky is fully dark. You can tell that Peter wants to stay longer, but the boy doesn't argue or complain. In fact, he doesn't say much of anything as they make their way home. Bucky's learned that usually means the boy is thinking or worrying about something, but he waits before asking. Peter always comes out and says whatever is on his mind eventually, if something's bothering him. He never keeps it in for long, not from Bucky. But Peter doesn't say anything, just continues staring down at the ground as they walk further away from their last bus stop. When they're almost home, Bucky thinks, screw it, and says,
Hey, what's on your mind?
Peter looks up, glances at him.
Huh? You're burning holes in the concrete. What's up? I can tell something's bothering you.
Peter's eyebrows furrowed together, a confused frown. No, nothing's bothering me exactly.
Then what is it?
To his surprise, Peter's cheeks actually go a little pink, and he looks back down at the ground. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it.
Kid.
Bucky says. He places his arm around Peter's shoulder encouragingly.
Come on, you know you can talk to me. What's got you all mute and blushy all of a sudden?
The redness in Peter's cheeks darkens as he ducks his head. It's embarrassing!
What, you got a girl in trouble or something?
Peter gives him a flat, unamused look. Yes, I know I have to marry her. The grin drops on Bucky's face.
Okay, too far. I am not ready for grandkids.
It's not like you're too young. Ow! I'm kidding!
You absolutely deserved that.
Bucky says, flicking him a second time, more gently.
Are you going to tell me what's actually wrong or not?
Peter laughs a little, then sighs and says, It's just, like I said, it's not a big deal. It really isn't. I was just thinking, next week it'll be a year since we met. Bucky suddenly regrets teasing Peter the way he had. He hadn't even realized he wasn't exactly keeping track of the days of the month last year before Peter came into his life. He hadn't needed to know more than the day of the week back then. He clears his throat awkwardly and lets his arm drop from the kid's shoulders.
So what are you thinking? You want to celebrate?
Can we? We don't have to, Peter quickly adds, trying to look nonchalant. I don't mind if it's not something big. Even just grabbing a hot dog along the boardwalk would be nice.
That does sound nice.
Bucky agrees.
We'll think of something. We could go out if you want. You need new clothes anyway.
Peter makes a face halfway between a pout and a grimace that's more endearing than it has any right to be. I say I want to go out and celebrate, and you try and turn it into a practical shopping trip. What gives? Bucky laughs.
What's wrong with being practical? We're going out anyway. We might as well stop and get you some new jeans. That is such a dad thing to say! Thank you.
Peter beams, his fake pout falling from his face as he laughs and leans into Bucky's side, his warmth achingly familiar beneath his arm. Bucky's halfway through his shift at work when it happens. He's just got his latest junkyard salvage up and running, the engine purring like it just rolled off the manufacture line, when Frank throws open the door to the shop and fixes him with wide, panicked eyes. Bucky's instincts are instantly flaring up, the alarm bells inside his body screeching, when Frank waves the TV remote agitatedly in his grasp and says, "That's better than bombing." For a moment, Bucky has no idea what he's talking about.
Another in Lagos?
Frank shakes his head, his face in shock.
No,
he says. He sounds older from the strain.
In Vienna, the UN meeting. One reporter's claiming the king of Wakanda was killed. What the hell?
Bucky says, straightening up and giving the man his full attention, noticing just how flustered Frank seems to be by the news.
Same people as Lagos? They targeted the Avengers or something?
Frank shrugs.
No idea yet. Bomb only went off an hour ago. Jesus. The hell is this world coming to?
Frank shakes his head, his tone severe.
It's one thing to try and take down a trained group like the Avengers, but a UN meeting full of diplomats in a parliament building full of innocent people, that's one seriously messed up group or individual.
Bucky doesn't know what to say. He's never seen Frank this shaken up before.
Hopefully they catch whoever did it,
he offers lamely, not sure what it is the man needs to hear.
How's Sharon holding up?
Frank's face softens somewhat at the question.
She always takes these things so hard, you know, internalizes them. Been that way ever since we had our daughter. She just couldn't look at death the same way after that, after having Emily. Every person who gets hurt or killed is somebody's kid. That's all she can think about. She hears about a child who's died, and she can be down for days after. The thought is just too much to bear. Peter's the same way.
Bucky says without thinking.
He's kinda like that. He can't see a death count as just a number. He grieves for every single person as if he knew them. It takes a toll.
He lets his shoulders slump slightly, his body relaxing in a way he isn't sure it ever has around Frank before, more vulnerable than he's ever been around anyone except Peter.
I don't know how to help him as his dad, you know. Half of me loves that he cares so much. He's good. He's so damn good. I've never met anyone who loves people the way Peter does.
Frank nods, so Bucky figures it's okay to keep going and says,
but the other half, the half that wants to be a good parent, I hate that he takes it so hard. People die, it happens, and he's going to have to deal with it over and over again throughout his life. I don't want him to be indifferent to it, but isn't that the better of the two options in the long run? It'll cause him less pain. He'll get worn down and burnt out if he keeps taking everything personally his whole life. I don't want to change him, but I don't know how to protect him.
As soon as the words leave his mouth, Bucky feels taut with unease. It's one thing, he thinks, to admit to himself that he isn't capable of being the stable, safe caregiver Peter needs, and more importantly deserves, but to admit it aloud to someone else, someone who actually is a father, it feels like he's given the words a tangible form, agency in the real world, as if speaking them has made them true. But Frank nearly nods again, understanding shining in his dark brown eyes.
That's normal, Barnes. Kids are naive, and it's hard as their parents to find the balance between letting them have their naivete and wanting them to be prepared for the real world. You don't want to take away your kid's compassion, and you shouldn't. He's a good boy. But he's young yet, and if you let him, he'll surprise you by how fast he grows up. He'll have to face the real world eventually, and all you can do to prepare him is remind him that for all the rotten people in this world, there are good people too, who are deserving of that compassion of his.
He can't help the smile that stretches across his face.
He's seen rotten people before. He's no stranger to them. He gives them his compassion all the same. I don't know where the hell he got that from, but he's never unkind. I don't think he knows how to be. It's easy to say that you'd rather your child be kind than smart,
Frank says knowingly.
But then you actually watch your kid get taken advantage of for their kindness or hurt by it, and you find yourself wishing they weren't so goddamn good-natured for their own sake. But that's the selfishness of being a parent. All you care about is your own child's well-being, and while you might not be fond of them acting cold, you'd rather they do it to others than have it done to them.
Frank looks at him then, his gaze deep, as if picking Bucky apart stitch by stitch.
But your boy ain't like that, and neither are you, Jim. You're overprotective as all hell. But don't kid yourself. You have the same compassion that he does.
Distantly, the memory of Peter saying something similar flashes in the background of Bucky's mind. The kid's downturned face, the soft tone of his voice, the wind gusting over them on a cold rooftop. "You're scared, too, of hurting me." Peter's warm, painfully trusting smile as he looked up at him, then, "You're the same as I am."
Am I that obvious?
Bucky says aloud before he needs to, earning a bark of laughter from his boss.
You think I don't know you as well after working here almost the whole damn year? You're a complete softy, Barnes. Thanks.
Frank smiles again and pats it firmly on the back as he turns to leave the shop.
Gonna go see if there's any updates on the news. You want me to keep you filled in? At this point, I'd be surprised if you didn't.
Bucky says, and Frank grunts and fails to hide his smile as he leaves. As Bucky had predicted to Frank, Peter does take the attack in Vienna pretty hard. He can tell when he picks the kid up from school that Peter is more withdrawn, quieter, his eyes downcast and lightless. Bucky takes him into his arms without saying anything, not worried about the onlookers leaving the school. Many of the other parents picking up their children appear to be doing the same thing. The tragedy of what's happened, leaving people in need of comfort. The parents needing to know their kids are safe. The kids needing to know they are too. They start walking away from the building so Bucky can say without worrying too much about being overheard,
"You all right?"
Not that that's a particularly unusual question given the circumstances, but he wants Peter to be able to answer honestly. The kid just nods, his lips pressed tightly together. "It's just so wrong," he says quietly. "And there's nothing anyone can do now. That's the worst part. All the people who just lost someone they loved, there's nothing anyone can do for them." Peter's shoulders hunched slightly, his lower lip quivering. "Ned said that apparently one of the council members' wife also worked in the building. Neither of them made it. They had kids. I keep thinking what it must have felt like hearing the news or seeing it online or something, knowing your parents are in there, but not knowing if they're okay, and then finding out they aren't. It's all so wrong." He tightens his arm around Peter's shoulders. Someone else was orphaned today. It doesn't surprise him that that's what Peter would focus on, agonize over, knowing all too well what that moment must have felt like, even though he claims he can't imagine it. Bucky knows just how well the boy can relate to that kind of abrupt grief, how familiar he is with that sudden world-ending loss.
"Whoever's behind it, I doubt the Avengers will just let this slide. They're not going to take an attack like this, sitting down,"
Bucky says, trying to cheer the boy up.
"Maybe they can't do much for all the grief those people are feeling, but they will be able to bring whoever's responsible to justice. There's got to be at least some comfort in that, knowing they won't be able to hurt anyone else."
"Yeah," Peter agrees numbly. Bucky sighs and hugs him tighter, one last squeeze before he lets go.
"Have you given any more thought to what you want to do on Friday?"
he asks, changing the subject. Something he actually can do to hopefully make the kid feel better. Peter shrugs, but his lips begin to quirk upward in a small smile. "Oh, really? Yeah, I'm fine with anything. We don't have to go anywhere. I'm fine with just staying in to celebrate. Thought maybe we could pick up pasta and Gatorade and cookies, like the first time we had dinner together, if that's okay."
"That sounds great,"
Bucky says, then feels himself begin to smirk before he can stop it.
"I do have an idea for what we can do after, though."
Peter glances up at them quizzically. "What?" He's full-on grinning now, unashamed.
"Well, in a few short months, you're going to be 16. So I'm thinking after dinner, I'll take you over to the shop and teach you how to drive that new Pontiac I just put together."
The wide-eyed, disbelieving look Peter gets on his face actually makes Bucky laugh out loud. "Really?" the kid says, seeming momentarily confused, like he isn't sure Bucky is actually talking to him or not. You want to teach me how to drive?" Bucky gives a half shrug, still smiling.
"We might end up someplace that it'd be convenient if you knew how. Even if we end up staying here for a long time, eventually you'll be an adult, and you'll be able to apply for your license without anybody's permission. If you already know how by then, it'll just be that much easier."
He gently ruffles the kid's hair, his gaze fond.
"I can't take you on any roads, but you can learn how to operate the thing and drive around the scrapyard at least. I've been putting a track together for you."
Peter's eyes light up like Bucky just told him he built him his own spaceship or something. Oh my god! Yes! Totally! Yes! I definitely want to!
Okay, says Bucky, laughing again. Keep up that enthusiasm. It's better than being scared shitless.
Oh, I'm terrified! Peter says earnestly, and the deadpan in his voice brings another chuckle out of Bucky. But it'll be so much fun, I can't wait!
Yeah, kid.
Bucky smiles.
Me either.
Friday is a year. A year since they met, since that fateful night Bucky saved Peter's life from those muggers and then slammed the door in his face. A year since everything changed for both of them, since the disjointed pieces of who Bucky was, who Peter was, found each other and fused together to make something entirely new, two lost singular entities combining into one family unit. It feels like both a noteworthy milestone and just another average day all at once. It feels like something they should celebrate, something meaningful that they should honor, and sort of a pointless formality at the same time. After all they've been through, everything that's happened since that night they met, it's almost a little absurd to make such a big deal out of just one day. But Bucky supposes that's exactly why they should celebrate it. They're meeting each other. To celebrate having gone through everything that they did, for surviving the things that they did, for finding each other. It's significant just how far they've come in 1 year's time, how completely irreplaceable Peter has become to him. By the time Friday rolls around, Bucky's more excited by the idea of celebrating it than even Peter is. That's why, when he's elbows deep in an engine at work, only hours away from being able to leave to pick Peter up, and his phone starts ringing with Peter's name flashing across the screen, wow, Bucky's grinning before he even answers the call.
Hey, kiddo, you excited for...
Dad! The unbridled, unmistakable panic in the kid's voice gives him pause.
Peter,
what's... Dad! Dad, oh my god, shit! Peter says in a rush, his voice breaking as he fights to get the words out. He sounds like he's crying. We've got to... We're in trouble! We're in huge trouble!
Hey, calm down.
Bucky tries to say, but he's already throwing down his tools and putting his glove back over his left hand.
Take a deep breath and tell me what happened.
Peter doesn't take a deep breath. They think you did it! Bucky stops, his face twisting in confusion. His brain doesn't have a chance to catch up with him before he's asking, what? In Vienna! Peter says quietly, hushed, his voice breaking. The attack on the UN! They think you did it! Coldness sweeps over Bucky, chilling him right down to the bone. His own voice sounds far away and alien to him as he asks,
who?
Everyone! Peter says, the weeping in his voice is obvious now. Everyone, the whole world! It's all over the news, the internet, they have a photo of you stinging the bomb, and I mean, it's not you, it can't be, you were here, but... It's your face! All the papers and articles are referring to you by name! They're saying James Barnes, the Winter Soldier, did it! Bucky's teeth clench so hard that his jaw aches from the strain.
Someone's trying to flush me out.
He says more to himself than to Peter, his tone numb.
They killed those people to frame me so they could force me out of hiding. It has to be Hydra.
Peter's voice is as broken as Bucky suddenly feels. What do we do? Steeling himself, Bucky clenches and unclenches his fist as he forces himself to trample his own panic down, needing to keep both of them moving. They're well and truly out of options now.
Where are you? Still at school?
I just left. I'm on my way home. I saw the news and I couldn't...
No, that's good. Bucky says, you get home, grab the bug-out bags, and wait for me. If I'm not there in 15 minutes, after you arrive, we go with Strategy B. All right, you remember what Strategy B is.
Peter sniffles, then says,
Good. If I don't make it there in time, you carry on with Strategy B. I'll meet up with you at the rendezvous as soon as I can.
Promise? Peter whispers, crying again.
Yeah, kiddo, I promise.
Bucky says, no idea how his voice can be so much calmer than he feels.
You know what to do. You'll be all right. I'll see you at home, okay? And if I don't, I'll find you. I promise.
Okay, says Peter. I'll see you at home. Be safe. Please be safe.
You too, kid. Be safe. I'll see you soon.
He's out the door before he's even hung up the phone, rushing through the dealership urgently when he catches sight of Frank alone at the front desk, staring fixedly at the wall-mounted TV. Bucky's stomach drops. It's exactly as Peter said. The news station is broadcasting a photo of him, of his face, entering the building in Vienna, his name and identity in big, bold letters underneath it for all the world to see. Frank slowly turns around and looks at him, his eyes blown black and wide with shock, his face utterly confused.
Drum?
Bucky's surprised by just how badly he wants to explain everything to the man. But there's no time for that. He turns and runs from the room, ignoring the shouts that trail after him, Frank calling his name over and over, but Bucky's too fast. He has to make it home. He has to make it home before he's found, before Peter is found. They have to get away, far, far away from everything where no one who would separate them can find them. It's the determination of that thought that keeps Bucky moving all the way back home. He doesn't stop, not even for a breather. He barely manages to avoid the traffic and other pedestrians as he beelines straight for their apartment. The only thought rushing through his head now is Peter, getting home to him and taking the kids somewhere safe away from all this mess until he can figure out what to do. It doesn't matter where they go, they just need to get away. Bucky makes it back to the apartment in record time, making it up the steps in quick boundless leaps, not caring at all for being stealthy now. That can wait, everything can wait until he and Peter are reunited. He pushes open the door, the wood splintering as he forces it. The first thing he sees is Peter in the kitchen, facing him with wide, terrified eyes, his bug-out bag tightly secured to his back and Bucky's bag clutched desperately in his hands. Peter's back is against the counters, as far away from the front door and Bucky as he can be in this tiny shithole apartment. The second thing he sees is Steve. Steve turns around and meets his gaze. Neither of them says anything. The room utterly silent, until all Bucky can hear is the distant sound of sirens, steadily growing louder.